All right, it's just a little bit after the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and start slowly while we're waiting for anyone else who might be here joining us. I'll introduce myself first. My name's Kristen Kohler. I'm the U.S. Director of Education for Scanning Pens. Jody, my colleague, and I are here today to host this webinar, and we're happy to have you with us. On this first slide, you'll see our email addresses and some of our social media links. So if you don't already follow us on LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter, there's some links for you there. And you can always go to our website at scanningpens.com to see what we're up to. But we will send you information after the webinar. So you'll get a copy of the slides and you'll get some useful links from today's event that you can follow up on, and we'll include the social media information as well. So happy to have you with us today. I'm going to start us off, and Jody is going to finish at the end with a demonstration. So stay tuned all the way until the end so you can see some of how our text-to-speech works with a scanning pen, with a reader pen. Our guests today are Jennifer Keeler and Sarah Wood. They are both researchers and authors of an article that we're going to break down for you today. Jennifer is an assistant professor at Mount St. Joseph School of Education and a researcher. Mount St. Joseph's in Ohio. And Sarah's with us today from Florida. She is a doctoral candidate at Florida State University. She's also a researcher, and she works at the phenomenal Florida Center for Reading Research. As a classroom teacher, I wish I had a nickel for every time I went to Florida Center for Reading Research to get quality materials and things to help me teach and do a better job in the classroom. So welcome to both of you today. So nice to have you with us. Just quickly, a disclaimer slide for Jennifer and Sarah. They are not being paid to present today. They don't have any financial gain or are being compensated or for the presentation or have any conflict of interest. So we'll just put that out there for today so that you know they're here today really to break down for us some of the information in an article that they wrote for the International Dyslexia Association Journal, which is called Perspectives on Language and Literacy. This article was written for the December 2020 edition, and I happened to read it and was really struck by some of the things that they talked about with regard to text-to-speech and how it can support comprehension and vocabulary in struggling readers. I've linked the QR code for you on the screen, so if you happen to have your phone and you want to take a picture of the QR code, hopefully it works on screen. But if not, don't worry, we'll send the article along in the materials that we send after today's webinar. All right, so without further ado, I am going to make sure Sarah and Jennifer are unmuted. And I'm going to ask them some questions today and just invite them to talk a little bit about the answers. And these questions and the answers that we're going to share with you today came directly from the article. So we really tried to break it down a little bit so that we could share for educators and for parents some of the meaty parts of this article because there was so much good stuff in it. And I wanted to start just by getting some information about what is text-to-speech. So we all probably are familiar with it in classrooms. So what is text-to-speech exactly, and how can it help struggling readers? And then maybe you could tell us a little bit about your research.
Sure. So glad to be here. Text-to-speech, historically, it's been when any audio is paired with text. Most recently, it's been primarily computer synthesized audio, so like Siri's a synthesized voice. And when it's simultaneously paired with text, readers are able to look and get the information visually as well as auditorily. The research of a meta-analysis shows text-to-speech is effective for students, and those using text-to-speech have a boost in their reading comprehension performance. And this is a significant boost. However, there's some individual differences and different conditions of which text-to-speech works better than others, such as some programs highlight the words as you talk. The article that I'm referring to, we can also send out the link. I can send it to you, Amy. It's a meta-analysis out of Journal of Learning Disabilities. I don't want to mistype it in the chat at the moment, but I can definitely get that information to you. And one of the remaining questions I had was, how do program differences impact text-to-speech? Like, you know, software programs that have highlighting, for example. And so other colleagues have taken that up.
Nice, thank you. Jennifer, did you have anything to add in terms of the type of research that you've done for text-to-speech?
Yes, I was really excited when I read meta-analysis from Sarah and her group of researchers. And I was just so delighted because we were both like on the same wavelength as far as what we were thinking about text to speech. So when Sarah mentioned that where future research needs to go with text to speech is further looking at how the user is engaged with these different text to speech features. And so that is one direction where I was going. And so I had a couple studies where I was looking at, for instance, highlighting versus no highlighting and adjusting the rate of the text to speech. I had it at a normal speed, and then I increased that speed. And with both of those features, I did not see any significant difference, whether or not they were using the highlighting or they weren't using the highlighting, or whether the text to speech was at a faster rate versus the normal rate. So I was surprised by those findings, and I think that there needs to be more research to look more deeply into these features. I don't think we're done yet, are we, Sarah? I think there's a lot of research that still needs to be done. And the other thing that Sarah was pointing out in the meta-analysis is looking more closely at which particular reading characteristics might, like which reading profile of a student might lend itself to having more success using TTS. So I was also looking at that question, and I found in one of my studies that children that reading and language proficiency was highly correlated with text to speech, meaning that the students that had a higher language proficiency tended to do better with text to speech. And I also looked at executive function and found that those students that had weaker executive function were probably not as successful with TTS usage.
Wow, that's interesting. So as a teacher, I don't always think about those other considerations when I offer a striving reader a text-to-speech tool. So it's good to know that there can be some profiles that are more suited for text-to-speech tools. Thank you for that information. I'm interested to see where the research goes and what happens next. In your article, you talk about reading quite a bit, and obviously reading is a complex task. So I'm wondering for the attendees today, if you can talk a little bit about the role that vocabulary and comprehension play in the act of reading, and then how exactly does text-to-speech support vocabulary?
And I'll start here and just highlight the fact that language comprehension, and we're going to talk both about language comprehension and word recognition. So the bottom and the top strand of the rope. But we'll start by talking about the top strand. And if we look at language comprehension, we know we've got lots of evidence in the research literature that shows that language comprehension predicts reading comprehension. So when we break language comprehension, we break down this comprehension further, Scarborough gives us some sub skills that we can look at more closely. And so as we look at the importance of vocabulary, and I just want to start out by saying that, just pointing out the fact that there is a real difference in the vocabulary that children are exposed to through our oral language or spoken language versus written text. So it is really critical for children to gain access to written text, because that is where they're going to find or be exposed to the vocabulary, that depth, what we call the depth and breadth of vocabulary. So they're going to encounter more specific words. And what's particularly critical is those words that they are going to find in academic content. So, and those aren't words that we typically will throw around as we're just having a conversation with somebody. So that's why it's important for them to encounter them in written text. And text to speech is a tool that can give them that access to the written text, so that they can be incidentally exposed to more vocabulary, richer vocabulary, more robust vocabulary. And text to speech also can provide, many of the text to speech tools have a dictionary component, or they're able to access a definition for a particular word. And this can be very helpful for a struggling reader, because they may not have just that instant knowledge of what that word means, or may not have the language skills to be able to identify or the context of those context clues of what that word might mean. So being able to access a definition at that time to help them understand the context of the sentence can be a very helpful tool.
Nice, thank you. So let me make sure I understand. So what I hear you saying is that oral language is a really important way that learners develop vocabulary. So we hear words spoken, we talk a lot with our families, we sing, we rhyme, we do all of those things. And those are all important parts of vocabulary development. But I also hear you saying that there are some words that only appear in written text that we need exposure to as well. There's language that we might not use while we're speaking. There's words that we may not say in conversations that would come up in books or stories, and we need exposure to words both spoken and written, correct?
Yes. And that in the article, we also talked about the importance of the read alouds, that as children are developing that oral language in those, from those early, like preschool, from, what did we say, toddlers up and through preschool, that those shared experiences are very important from the early years to start exposing children to this breadth and depth of vocabulary, even from that early age.
Perfect. Sarah, anything else to add there?
I would just say it's never too young to read to a child. We had talked and included some possible ways for parents who either, because they're dyslexic themselves, or they might be English as a second language, some ways that you can use technology to assist in reading aloud to your child. Recently, my nephew discovered that some of his favorite books are read by politicians, and so I don't hold a torch to, I guess, like some of the past presidents have read kids' books now during COVID, and so that can be really entertaining for the kids. I don't know, all of a sudden I'll become cool reading to them.
Oh, how interesting. Wait, how old is your nephew?
5.
Okay. I was picturing like a 15-year-old listening to, a former president speak. So awesome. So very good. I like all of that reference to exposure. I also want to just, for the non-educators in our audience, this is a graphic of Scarborough's reading rope. And it's a framework that teachers and educators, especially reading teachers, often used to help anchor our instruction. Those two sections of the rope, the top part and the bottom part, fold into our instruction. And we talked a little bit about this top part where vocabulary lives. And in a few moments, we'll talk a little bit about the bottom part as well. I see that there are some questions in the chat, so hold on. I know we're going to talk a little bit about questions when we get a little bit further along, but let's see if some of those get answered as we go. So I am so glad that you brought up exposure to text and the fact that dyslexia and reading difficulties can run in families, because if I have a parent who is reluctant to read, I may not read with you as often. And so there are some real difficulties with reading, and when reading is hard for you, you tend to avoid reading. So talk to us a little bit about some of the consequences of that lack of exposure and how it can impact kids at school, both social, emotionally, and academically.
Yeah, so for children who don't get the, the written words either read to them or they're unable to read it for themselves, a lack of background knowledge can develop in addition to vocabulary, which we had talked about. So for example, a child who might be landbound just geographically because they're in Ohio, for example, and they won't be able to know, what the Pacific Ocean's like, assuming, of course, they didn't go there with their family for a family trip or something. But books really open up experiences that the child wouldn't engage in their day-to-day life. And I know some of that you can get through videos and on television, but what is unique to print are the syntactic way, and just so basically the ways the sentences are constructed, the ways the paragraphs are constructed. And yes, the student's not going to necessarily need that for their day-to-day conversations, but that foundational knowledge builds upon their next educational steps. So for science textbooks, history textbooks, King Lear, for example, so for those higher grades, if a student has a solid understanding of how syntax, how words fit together, how they're used, statements that are common in literature, like all the while. I don't hear all the while very common in spoken text. I hear it pretty frequently in some fiction I was listening to the other day. So that's the more cognitive educational development. But on top of that, there's a real frustration that students have. And this is, you can see that in one of the children. But they also are missing out on possible social opportunities. This example is going to date me because it's Harry Potter, and that, isn't as new anymore. But when Harry Potter was really new, it was critical to have the audiobook so everyone could have access to that knowledge, and they didn't feel left out, because not being able to join in on common social experiences decreases opportunities for developing friendships and getting that some of those softer skills that are, the 21st century workplace really demands softer skills. And so reading truly is involved in most aspects of life.
Nice, nice. Jennifer, can you talk to us a little bit about if a struggling student, if a sixth grader who is reading below grade level has access to text-to-speech tools, how does that allow them to access grade level vocabulary, and how can that help them with motivation and attention and engagement overall?
Well, and I think one of the big words that I think of is the fatigue factor. Is that when we're saying gaining access to this grade level material, when you think that about the struggling reader, which I'll talk about that bottom strand of the rope in just a minute, but just getting through content material, the volume of content material that they need to to master or conquer. You know, just thinking about how many chapters do they need to read in their language arts class, and plus a portion of a chapter of social studies and science. This begins to really mount up, and that stack of what I've got to get through. And it can be so overwhelming. And the text to speech can allow them to be able to conquer that pile of reading that they have to do, and so that it's not so overwhelming. And I'm just not going to do it because I'm just too tired. It's just exhausting.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you. I know as an interventionist, I have seen students disengage just because it's either too much or too hard. And yet I think what you're saying about vocabulary is that sixth grader or eighth grader or fifth grader needs exposure to grade level vocabulary and themes and content. And we all, I think, agree about how important it is to continue to provide high quality reading instruction and reading intervention when it's needed. And alongside that, those text-to-speech tools can continue to expose a child to the vocabulary that they need to be successful at that grade level, and also allow them to engage in conversations about comprehension activities. You know, what's the theme here? What do we remember? What do we study? So they can continue to be involved without getting exhausted or getting discouraged, and they can stay engaged in that way. Let's take a look here. So thank you, Jennifer, for the segue to the bottom part of Scarborough's reading rope. I wanted just to make sure that we talked a little bit about the function of decoding and reading, and how that supports a proficient reader and how it is a deficit in a struggling reader, especially when it comes to comprehension.
And first of all, thank you for what you just said, Kristen, because I do want to say both Sarah and I are very much, I'm a professor in a reading science program. So the first priority is getting these children proficient, trying to build the skills on these on that bottom strand of the rope, working on phonological awareness, and teaching that sound symbol correspondence, getting that alphabetic principle down. And all of that is so necessary. And that intervention and that solid instruction is so important. Unfortunately, and research supports this, there are still those students that may become what can be called compensated dyslexics, where they are decoding with some accuracy, fairly accurately, but they're still very slow. So this is where text-to-speech really can be a helpful tool. So let me break down, what I mean by decoding and sight recognition. Both of those are listed down there on the bottom strand of the rope. And really the goal for every reader is that automatic, instantaneous sight word recognition. They see a word, they know it. And building that sight word lexicon, that is the absolute goal. And proficient readers begin to build their sight word lexicon rapidly, but those struggling readers do not. And they end up spending more time on the decoding piece instead of progressing fairly rapidly from, a first grader spending the majority of their time on that decoding piece and less of that instant sight word recognition. That flops fairly quickly for a proficient reader, where they spend more of their time, they've got instant automatic recognition, and less time spent having to actually stop and sound out a word. So that decoding piece is, I don't know this word, and I'm going to have to decipher or start to figure out this word by sounding it out. And when a student is spending more time on this decoding piece, this is more laborious, it's slower, and it ends up impacting their comprehension. And as the visual is showing there, if they're spending so much energy just trying to slog through the words, by the time they get to the end of the sentence, where they don't have the desk space or that cognitive energy, and it's like, what did I just read? Connecting it all, that connected text of that sentence ends up becoming impeded and lost for them. And they're experiencing most likely comprehension breakdowns just through the sheer effort of the decoding.
Exactly. Ugh, thank you. Slogging. That's a great word to describe what most of our striving readers do. Um, I love how you talked about sight words. It's such an interesting phrase because for teachers, we have these things that we teach called sight words. But when you use sight words, you mean to describe words that we know automatically when we see them. We can read them right away, whether they're irregular words or words that teachers might use as sight words like maybe said that doesn't follow all of phonetic rules or can't be decoded easily, as well as phonetically regular words like that or this. So all the words that we know as proficient readers are words that we can see and read right away, whether they're spelled regularly or irregularly, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then I think, for me as an intervention teacher, what text to speech always did for my kids was level the playing field. So we could give them access to those elements of text at the same rate as their peers a lot of the time. So whether it was a screen-based text to speech tool like ReadWrite for Google, or whether it was a handheld device like the scanning pen, at least they could progress through text quickly or at a similar rate as their peers so they could stay on task, stay engaged, and learn alongside their fellow students. It occurred to me as I was reading your article, because you mentioned English language learners, I would love for you to talk just a little bit about the impact of text to speech on English language learners and how some of the features can support them in similar ways as striving readers.
And as we talk about our second language learners, I just kind of wanted to back up because I did talk about the differences between spoken language and written language. And I want to just come back to that. With our second language learners, we have what's called our BICS and CALP. And the BICS is that basic inner communication skills, those interpersonal communication skills. So that develops for a second language learner from up to 3 years. And so their spoken language may be coming along really fairly rapidly, and they're conversing with their friends, they're in English, and the teacher maybe think, oh, they're learning, they're progressing in their English language use. But then when we talk about their proficiency with their new language, the CALPs, we're talking about that cognitive academic language proficiency. And that can take up to 7 years for a second language learner to master that. So while they may be conversing with their peers at lunchtime and it looks like they have the language down, what they are able to understand and take in at an academic standard is much different and takes longer to develop. And so again, text to speech can be a helpful tool to help, again, give them access, like a struggling reader, to more content, more language, but also there are things like the on-demand dictionary, because we know that one of the areas where second language learners struggle is in vocabulary. They don't have the depth and breadth of vocabulary coming into this language that they're learning that their, let's say, that their English peers typically have, because they haven't been hearing it. So that vocabulary deficit, it can be very real and a challenge. And so that vocabulary deficit is an issue, but also some of the understanding some of the constraints of our language, like sentence structure can be difficult for them, and also the correct pronunciation of words, where the stress of the syllables in their language may be different than where syllables are stressed in English. So text to speech can help them in hearing that correct pronunciation of the English language.
Nice. Okay, so I learned 2 new acronyms today, BICS and CALPS. So I will follow up with our attendees on those 2 acronyms so that they have some information on that as well. And then I'm so glad that you talked about the pronunciation, because I was wondering if that was a factor with English language learners. Is it also important for language learners to be able to hear a new word or an unfamiliar word more than one time?
Yeah, so repeated exposure is critical to not only learn a new word, how to pronounce it, how to read it, but as well to fully integrate it into your vocabulary and your usage. And I'm happy to send more links on the research if anybody is interested. But what the past research has demonstrated, not by myself, but other researchers, is some words people know, I kind of know what a dog is. It has fur, it has 4 legs. And then there's deep, rich understanding of, the definition of dog, where you can term several different breeds, and you kind of know, where dogs came from. And you can have this whole mental representation of all these associations with one word. And so having words repeated and the ability for the reader in the context that feels comfortable for them to hear it is empowering and good for their learning. So they might be in biology class, but have a reference, to a historical event, and and they're like, wait, I haven't heard that term, or I don't know that country, and so to hear those proper nouns is especially helpful.
Nice. Yeah, I totally agree. So text-to-speech can help with the pronunciation of new or unfamiliar words, with repeated exposure to those words until the learner can internalize them, and to help them understand the definition or the usage of those words, especially at a surface level. And then more exposure to the text will help them deepen their understanding of those words. So hopefully I'm summarizing that adequately. Gosh, it's just so encouraging for me to know that some of these text-to-speech tools can support learners with challenges. I'm just wondering if you can, as we head toward the end here, talk to us. I chose this picture because it is a really good feeling when students are able to access text successfully. So from your research, what do you notice in students when they're able to use text-to-speech tools in order to access some of the print that they need for learning?
So, as mentioned before, we see less fatigue, less anxiety. But what we hear in some of the more qualitative research as well, and from my personal observations and experiences, is a real feeling of empowerment, of the learner not being reliant on either another human adult to read them their material, which is great, and that works wonders when it's able to work. But there's something special about having a reader be able to go to the library, choose any book, open it up, use assistive technology, and get their answers independently, and whenever they want, on demand. So that type of sense, as well as really kind of being able to be on the cutting edge. The nice part about a lot of these tools is that they're integrated into existing programs, either on the computer or the pen. You can use it on almost any physical piece of paper. And so no one's limited by their ability to decode words. All of a sudden, your world opens up to be able to to learn about anything, whether or not it's at your decoding ability, your word level reading ability.
Nice.
You can really just access anything at the interest level.
Nice, nice. Jennifer?
And I think about that independence factor. As Sarah was saying, text to speech can be accessed on a variety of platforms. And I think it's really great when you see students that become proficient with using text to speech, and really the proficiency to the point where, depending on the reading task, they may be using a particular TTS tool for that reading task and another TTS tool for another task. So I think they can become so confident in their how they're choosing to use it, and whether it is on demand or what types of reading material are best suited for which type of TTS platform. And I think that's exciting to see.
Nice. Yeah, I am so happy that you mentioned that. I think you touched on it in the article too. As a teacher, it does take time to support students and help them figure out what tool is going to be a good tool for them and in what situation. So they have a toolbox approach where they can use screen-based text-to-speech when they need it. They can use handheld text-to-speech when they need it, and they have the time and the opportunity and the training to play with those tools until they feel proficient so that they can use them in different circumstances. And that does give them freedom, confidence, engagement. I'm so glad that you mentioned that. Toward the end of your article, you guys have this great way of summarizing everything that you wrote. I'm going to read it verbatim here for us. Text-to-speech is a valuable and practical tool to boost reading comprehension and increase word learning. Learning how to use these technologies in a variety of ways to increase engagement with reading is critical for struggling readers. I'm wondering, as we close out and get ready for Jody's demonstration, if you can just tell us a little bit about, what this article meant to you, and, kind of, the main point that you're hoping that educators and parents will take away from some of this research in your article.
So this is a terrific tool, text-to-speech, to have in any toolbox. But what we were trying to say by a variety of ways and kind of with the individual learners is it's a tool. If you really need a screwdriver, don't use a nail. Really try to match your objective and your goal with the tool. And different text-to-speech tools are good for different things. Honestly, from personal observations, I would recommend more of an on-demand approach for something like a math textbook or a biology textbook with lots of charts and graphs and stats, because oftentimes students don't really need the equations to be read aloud, but they need kind of the more background and theory. So it's really to be mindful of how and when to use text-to-speech.
Nice. Thank you. Jennifer, anything else to add?
I think as Sarah and I were writing this, I kept throwing out the word Matthew effect. And I guess that is overall was one of the take-home points, is that in what we mean by the Matthew effect is that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And this is what happens when children are coming from language backgrounds that they have less exposure to language, and they hit their preschool, their kindergarten, and they have less words in their toolbox. They've got less words to label the experiences. And these children, it's hard for them to catch up, because those children that have more exposure to language will keep lapping them around the track. And text-to-speech tools are a way to give students more access to that language, where that lower decoding or word recognition ability can be less impactful for them, so that they can get to the meaning of the text and they can get to that vocabulary.
Love it. Thank you. I so appreciate you both lending your time and your expertise today. I hope we have the opportunity to hear from you again, either around new research or around some of the questions that we have coming out of here. So let me go to the chat. There are a couple of questions. One of them is, do you see benefits in comprehension or reading development if the child is not looking simultaneously at the text? What does the research say about text to speech and watching or tracking the words as you're listening?
So we're hesitating because this is actually one of the under-researched areas. There is some eye tracking research out of other countries, but because the languages are so different, it's hard to tell. So the honest answer is we really don't fully know yet.
Okay.
What I can say is language exposure in any form is always beneficial for students. Jennifer,
Nice.
do you have more to add?
Mm-hmm. Yes, this is, as far as future research questions, this is definitely where Sarah and I have our conversations, because I can say that anecdotally in my research that children tracking along as they are seeing the text to speech, is the goal that that's what you want students to be doing. But yet there were those students that I think may go to an auditory mode where and that's where text to speech, the rate of it, their processing speed, it gets tricky. And I think we really, I know Sarah and I would like to look more closely at this and be able to give a better answer to that question.
Great. All right. So this sounds like an area where we don't have a definitive answer today, but stay tuned. There's more to come. There's one question about, you talked early on, Jennifer, about the types of profiles that benefit less from text to speech with regard to executive function. Is there anything else you can offer there to elaborate on the types of executive function profiles that might not benefit as much from text to speech?
No, this again is another area that needs more research, because what I had is more of a composite executive function. So I did have, like, let's say working memory was part of one of those components of executive function, and attention that was part of that composite. But with my study and the correlations that were being done, it was not teased out to those individual components. And that would be something that also I was part of another study where we did more of like the Wisconsin word sorting test, where that was something that was a different type of executive function task. And so there needs to be more research where we can tease that out better.
Great. Interesting. I wasn't aware of that even the idea of a profile until I read your article. So it was good to just deepen my thinking in that regard as an intervention teacher, or to help educators in the classroom think a little bit, if a text-to-speech tool isn't working, there may be factors outside of the tool itself that are impeding that. All right, Amy asked a question here, and it sounds like Sarah responded a little bit in the chat. What resource or tools are part of common platforms that students are using to help with Read Aloud? And Amy, if we don't nail that question, feel free to unmute yourself or drop another clarifier in the chat. But are we looking for a list of common tools, or common tools where text-to-speech is commonly embedded? Am I getting it, Amy? Let me go down to the chat. Yes, Amy says yes. So commonly now we see text-to-speech embedded in Word documents, in some internet browsers. And then there are lots of apps and widgets you can add on. Do you have any recommendations for common tools?
So there's built, like, Microsoft has their Read Aloud and their immersive reader. Any Chromebook has an option. Jennifer, what is it called? Select to speak? Or wait.
Let me just stop you for a second. Amy, let me see if I can unmute you. I don't know if that did it. Oh, nope, it didn't. All right. Yeah, Amy, I see your microphone, but I can't unmute you. I'm sorry. So in the accessibility settings on a Mac, whoops. All right, Amy, I'm going to come back to that question. Hang on one second. Another question is, what research has been done about when to introduce text-to-speech, where they are in their reading development, and maybe something about age, because they lose the motivation and it's easier to get the same results. So is there an ideal time that we're looking at to introduce text-to-speech as far as reading level or age?
So I literally was involved in a chapter this week that wrote, this is one of the questions that we still need to answer on the ideal time to introduce it and how much intervention. But what Jennifer and I both will say is this isn't an either or situation. You can do the systematic explicit phonics lessons, but for fun or to get content knowledge or to be exposed to a new concept, you can also use text-to-speech and read aloud tools as well. It's not, it's misleading to think of it as in terms of like two types of sequences.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's helpful. I know, when I'm supporting kids, it can vary widely. Sometimes I'll start a second grader on text-to-speech tools, but they sort of fumble around with it longer than, a fifth grader might pick it up more quickly. So all of those access points, I think, are dependent on the type of tool, what the needs of the students are, and then what kind of support there is in place to keep the student moving forward with that tool. I think the worst thing that we can do is to hand a student a ReaderPen and walk away without providing them some support, some encouragement, some modeling, some opportunity to practice, and really get them proficient with that tool before we allow them to work independently and expect them to be successful in that way.
And while there's not any explicit research within the English language on the co-development of text-to-speech use, and acquiring word recognition through phonics, Jennifer, I mean, you can chime in if you feel differently, but I would strongly, these things can be done together. It's not going to hurt anything for both to be done together.
Nice. Okay, I'm going to queue up Jody, and I'm going to say thank you to both Jennifer and Sarah for, again, just sharing their knowledge and expertise and time with us today. If you have other questions as an attendee, drop them in the chat, and then we will try to answer them when we send a follow-up email to you all. Jody's here. She's my colleague in California, who's jumped on with us to give us a demonstration of the ReaderPen, so you can see a couple of the text-to-speech features that we've been talking about all this time. Hey, Jody.
Thanks, Kristen, and really thanks, Sarah and Jennifer. My name's Jody. I'm the Director of Strategy for Scanning Pens. Been working here for 4 years now. Actually, we're coming up on our 5th year in America and 17 years globally. Scanning Pens has been in business. And so we've known Sarah and Jennifer and really learned a lot from them on the text-to-speech over the years. And so I really value your opinions and loved everything you were talking about, and listening to you, Kristen, join in with that as from the teacher perspective was just really awesome. So thank you so much for that. And a lot of the things you were talking about, you know, there are a lot of resources out there, you know, built-in things, non-built-in things, apps, all kinds of things that that can help a reader that is striving, as Kristen says, and as some others say, struggling. So, you know, whatever term you choose to use, there's a lot of different things out there. And I think it is valuable and important to have lots of tools in their toolbox, as they said, and finding the right one for the right student at the right time for the right thing. So, so basically, I'm just going to do a quick, because we're coming to the end here. Scanning Pens has reading devices, text-to-speech reading devices, and a lot of people know us. We're selling in every state across America. We hear really valuable and good feedback from our end users. I normally would tell a bunch of student stories, which are well liked by our viewers, but I just don't have time for it today. So if you'd love to hear some testimonials and love to hear some student stories, I'd be happy to share those with you at any time. You can contact us afterwards. But for today's demonstration, I just thought I'd run through our most popular, which is the ReaderPen, and you might find it helpful as well. So this slide just talked about most of the different types of students that we can that we hear back from our teachers using it. So we have a really nice video out of New York City with 4th and 5th grade inclusion classrooms talking about math story problems and how those students, you know, this one student in particular was struggling reading the word problems. And, you know, he was a great math student, but he struggled with the reading portion. And so by giving
Hey, Jody, can you hear me?
It's very discreet. I'm going to show it to you in just a moment. It basically scans cross-printed text. You hear it in your earbuds, and then there's a lot of different features in there that I'm just going to cruise through because I want to show you the most important is how you can scan printed material into your computers for the digital learning now. We are a Google partner, so it's nice to be able to show people how they can scan into their Chromebooks and their laptops. So this is the ReaderPen that I'm going to show you. It does have all of these different features. The one I'm going to focus on is the scan to cursor, but I will show you briefly the text reader, dictionary, voice recorder, and there's a unique setting in here called an exam lock, which allows you to lock out all these other settings and be able to allow a student to read a test on their own. So if you have a shortage of human readers at your school, which we hear a lot about, or one person who's trying to read 5 different tests to different kids, this is a great tool if they just need a little extra help. It does connect in multiple ways. So over here on the left, you're going to see that it connects to the earbuds. It comes with this little storage case for protection. The one I'm going to show you is the one in the middle, how you can connect and scan directly into a Word doc or a Google Doc. I'm going to show you a Google Doc today because that's what I have up. The bottom right corner is a loop for hard of hearing, which will amplify the sound if they have a telecoil hearing aid. And the top one is putting it out to an external speaker, which, you know, oftentimes in a reading circle or something is really nice for that student who I've heard teachers tell me that they use it with non-speakers, and allowing them to be in a reading circle and scan theirs and have the voice come out of the speaker allows them to be included in the classroom. So inclusion is a very important piece in today's education space and just in general, I would think, in life. So hopefully, Kristen, can you tell me if you can see the screen share? All right.
Yep, you can see your document.
Perfect. So I'm going to flip over to my camera at the same time. I'm going to just go to a document camera and show you, and we'll just take literally 3-4 minutes and show you this. So So this is the ReaderPen. As you can see, it's very small, about the size of an Expo marker. You put your earbuds in here and it is rechargeable. So as I mentioned, you do have a text reader. You would just simply click on that. So talk about easy access, quick to printed materials. You would scan across any printed text and it would read out loud to you. So I'm not sure that you can hear it on a webinar, so I'm sorry about that. But the nice part is you can repeat it as many times as you want. You can go up and just hear one word over and over. So sometimes with that pronunciation they were talking about, a student might need to hear it 50 times before they know how to pronounce it, and that's okay, they can do that. They can also go in and go to a definition and define that word. And hear the definition right in their ear and get right back to their reading, which really helps them stay on task with their reading and stay engaged rather than having to go somewhere else and look up a word. So basic technology there in the text-to-speech. You also have a dictionary, and I'll just show you one thing about the dictionary that's really nice that schools tell us about. You have multiple dictionaries over here. But if they have a word list that they'd like to work on, they can just scan across the word and they can hear the word and then press the center button and actually hear the definition read out to them. And if they want to study all of their words at once or bring it into the computer, they can scan their words all the way across. So I'm just going to do that many for time factor. And if they go into the menu, sorry, I have a little bit of a glare, so I apologize for that. You have history, and you can see that there's 12 words scanned here. They have all of their words scanned here. There's no need for Wi-Fi. There's no need for internet access or anything. This is all portable and in the pen for them. So they can study straight from the pen and hear their words. So if they're on a bus or a train or anything, they could do that. And they also have the ability to drag and drop that right into the computer as well, kind of like a USB stick, basically. I would say lastly, one thing I like to point out, because I'm really passionate about inclusion and things, is that you can actually have a student, sometimes teachers tell me that they're having students circle or highlight words that they don't know. And I think we all know kids that don't want their friends to know that they're circling or scanning multiple words on a page. This is a nice way you could have a student scanning the words that they don't know, getting looking up that word, so they have the ability to learn that word on their own, but then you could discreetly look into the history and realize how many words they were really struggling with, and it wouldn't be shown to their friends. So I promised you I'd do it quick. So here is the final part. There is a voice recorder. There is an exam lock that will lock all that out, but I think Krista wanted to keep this under an hour, so we're going to keep it under an hour. So over here, UDisc is where I was telling you you can bring that history in, but when I plugged the pen into my computer, I have keyboarding as the option. So I'm going to pick keyboarding. It's going to say character scanning. And if you go over here and you look at my Google Doc, sorry, you can change this to any font size. So if you have someone with low vision or anything like that, you can, put it up bigger. Put your cursor on the page, and when you scan across the printed text, you're going to notice that it'll drop it right into the Google Doc for you. So again, this would work with Word. It would work with
Jody, we lost your audio again.
Oh, sorry.
We lost your audio there just for a second when you scanned that second sentence.
Oh, I was just saying that we have a lot of students that use this for simplified note taking. So if they have a lot of heavy text and they're a struggling reader, They might choose to scan in their questions and answers into that, and then be able to have, you know, a 2 to 4 page document rather than 100 pages.
Right. So that functions a lot like a digital highlighter. Jody, there's a question about, since we can't hear the pen, can you describe the voice? It's a synthesized voice.
Yeah, I would say it's similar to Siri. In my
Mhm.
opinion, I don't know if you feel that way, but I think it is. There were some pens on the market, you know, early on that were amazing pens at the time, and they had quite a robotic voice. So a lot of people might know those pens, but this has been upgraded. It is OCR, so it's pretty clean voice. There are accents, multiple accents, so the students sometimes find that to be interesting, and it does read in English, Spanish, and French as well. So,
and then Sharon asked just about updates for the dictionary and how that works.
Updates will depend on your serial number. You can look on the back of the pen for that. There's a long number on there you can see if you already have a pen. Updates are free depending on what serial number you're on. But most of the newer pens since 2017, 18 have been able to be updated to the latest firmware. There's a couple steps to it, so you'd want to call and make sure that you connect with a representative to make sure that you get through it properly, but those are free. And currently, I'm on the latest, and so for American English, we have 3 different dictionaries. We have the Oxford Primary for more simplified, we have the Collins, and we have the New Oxford American Dictionary as well.
Okay. And then I think the last question, the CPEN exam reader, what does it have these same features?
So the exam reader only has the text reading. So where I had mentioned that you can do an exam lock, I will show you that just super quick, but this way, sorry, rather than switching cameras. So if I went into settings in this, and I could exam lock it with a code, the teacher creates the code. This would become like the exam reader because you could lock out everything but reading. You can also lock out in reading and leave the reading and dictionary at the same time. The exam reader only reads. So although there's settings where you can speed up, slow down, put word pauses and punctuation pauses, it's mostly used for exam accommodations only. So maybe at a higher ed in America is where we sell the most of those. And some schools that have bought lots of pens and don't want to manage the lock would buy the exam pen as well, but only reading.
Okay. So you're looking at a slide of our family of pens. The exam reader is the orange one on the right. The reader pen that Jody just used is on the left. And I put our emails in the chat, so if you have any other questions for either one of us, you can always reach out. I want to say thank you again to Sarah and Jennifer for hanging out with us today. I hope we get to talk to you guys again. I turned off my camera because I froze, so hopefully you can still hear me, but you don't need to see me. We'll follow up with everyone with an email and some links to share and some more information and any other questions that you have. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Stay safe and be well and teach well. Thanks you very much.